The repair clamp locked into place with a satisfying click, sealing the damaged section of the power conduit. I double-checked the readings on my wrist display. Power flow stabilizing, integrity at 94%. Good enough for a temporary fix until the engineering team could get a replacement section fabricated. Conduit repair complete, I said, adjusting my position against the gentle current. Holding at 94% integrity. Copy that, Travis. Naomi's voice came through my helmet speakers. How's the visibility out there? I swept my suit lights across the exterior of Node 7. The massive cylindrical structure rose from the ocean floor, its reinforced hull plating disappearing into the darkness above. 3 kilometers beneath the ocean surface, everything beyond my immediate light cone was pitch black. About 8 meters, I replied. Standard for this depth. I'm going to check the external housing before heading back. My exosuit's thrusters hummed as I maneuvered along the node's outer wall. These deep-sea maintenance suits were essentially miniature submarines shaped like bulky spacesuits, heavy, cumbersome, but keeping me alive under crushing pressure. After 5 years working for Oceanic Futures Corporation, the claustrophobic feeling had mostly faded. The facility was a research and energy production complex. 7 interconnected nodes anchored to the ocean floor at the edge of the Mariana Trench. What exactly we were researching was above my security clearance, but keeping the power flowing was very much my responsibility. I ran my gloved hand along a seam in the node's exterior, feeling for irregularities. The water around me was cold, near freezing, but my suit's thermal regulation kept me comfortable. The job was routine, just another day at the office, 3 kilometers underwater. That's when I felt it. A vibration, subtle at first, then growing stronger. Not from the node, from somewhere out in the darkness. It traveled through the water, making my suit tremble slightly. I turned, sweeping my lights toward the source, but saw nothing except the endless black of the deep ocean. Then, movement. A massive shadow passed just beyond the reach of my lights. Something big, much bigger than any fish that should be at this depth. Control, I'm picking up unusual movement out here, I said, trying to track the shadow with my lights. Large object, moving fast. Can you get a read on it? No response. Naomi, do you copy? Static filled my ears. The comms were down. My heart rate ticked up, but I kept calm. Equipment failures happened all the time at this depth. Protocol was clear. Return to the airlock if communications failed during an exterior operation. I activated my thrusters, turning back toward Node 7. The vibrations intensified, making my entire suit shudder. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The water around me began to move, not the usual gentle current, but a stronger flow pulling me away from the node. Come on, I muttered, increasing thruster power. The suit lurched forward, fighting against the strengthening current. My lights caught the gleam of the airlock still 30 meters away. The current suddenly shifted, yanking me downward with unexpected force. My suit's alarm chimed as the thrusters strained at maximum output. I was being pulled toward the ocean floor, away from Node 7. I redirected my lights downward and felt my stomach drop. The seabed was splitting open. A massive fissure I'd never seen before, despite working this area for months. Dark water churned around it like a whirlpool, and my suit was caught in its pull. The suit sensors flashed warnings across my display. Abnormal energy readings emanated from the crevice below. Electromagnetic signatures unlike anything I'd seen before. Not natural. Not by a long shot. Mayday. Control. Do you read me? I shouted into my dead comms. Nothing but static answered. The thrusters whined in protest as they fought the powerful current. I was losing ground, being dragged meter by meter toward the fissure. My training kicked in. Conserve power, look for anchor points, maintain calm. Panic kills faster than equipment failure. As the current pulled me closer to the fissure, my lights illuminated something that made me freeze. Within the dark crack in the ocean floor, partially buried in sediment but unmistakable, geometric shapes, right angles, smooth surfaces, artificial structures. Man-made? No, that wasn't possible. Not here, not at this depth, not structures that looked ancient yet somehow preserved. The company would have documented something like this, unless they already knew. The current surged, nearly tearing my grip from the thruster controls. I was seconds from being pulled into the fissure. My lights caught a rocky outcropping just ahead, my only chance. I stretched out my arm, the exosuit's mechanical joints extending my reach. My gloved fingers scraped against rock, found purchase, and clamped down. The current pulled at my legs, trying to drag me deeper, but I held firm. The suit's joints creaked under the strain. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the current weakened. The pull lessened. I clung to the rock, not trusting the reprieve. My comms crackled to life with a burst of voices. "Read me? Travis, do you copy? Your vitals are spiking." Naomi's voice was tight with stress. "I'm here," I gasped, still gripping the outcropping. "Lost communications for a while. There's something—" "What did you see?" Naomi cut me off, her tone unusually sharp. Not concerned about my safety, but demanding information. "There's a fissure down here," I said, slowly pulling myself back toward Node 7 using the rocky outcrops. "Some kind of structure inside it. The current nearly—" "Walker," Director Simpson's voice interrupted, cold and commanding. "Return to the airlock immediately. That's an order." "Sir, I'm looking at something important here. There are structures in this fissure that—" "Your suit is malfunctioning," Simpson said flatly. "Oxygen recycler showing errors. Return now." I checked my display. Oxygen levels were normal. My readings show. A notification flashed across my helmet display. External recording data transfer initiated. Then, data transfer complete. External recordings purged. What the hell? I watched as all video and sensor logs from the past 30 minutes disappeared from my suit's memory. "Did you just wipe my suit records?" "Return to the airlock, Walker," Simpson repeated, ignoring my question. "We'll debrief you inside." The comm line clicked off. I hung there in the darkness, looking back at the fissure. The current had completely subsided now, and the water was calm again as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. I'd seen it, and now my evidence was gone. 3 kilometers beneath the ocean's surface, surrounded by crushing darkness, I realized the company was hiding something. Something they didn't want even their own maintenance technicians to see. I gripped the internal ladder rungs, climbing up through the airlock tube as water drained around my boots. My mind raced with questions about what I'd seen. That fissure, those structures, the bizarre current. None of it made sense, and the fact that my recording data had been wiped made it worse. The airlock hatch above me opened with a mechanical hiss. I hauled myself up onto the metal grating of the prep room floor, my exosuit dripping seawater into the collection drains. I was barely out of my helmet when Director Simpson pushed through the inner door, his face tight. "Walker." His voice cut through the ambient hum of the facility's systems. "Medical eval. Now." "Sir, I'm fine. What I saw down there was a hallucination." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Deep pressure plays tricks on the mind. You know that." I unlatched my chest plate, the mechanical locks releasing with practiced precision. "With respect, sir, I know what I saw. There's something down there. Some kind of structure near that fissure." and my suit readings picked up energy signatures. Simpson's jaw tightened. Your suit malfunctioned. That's why we purged the data. Corrupted files can damage our systems. It was such an obvious lie that I almost laughed. 5 years with OFC, and this was the first time I'd ever heard that excuse. I need to file a complete incident report, I said, working on the leg seals of my suit. Protocol states, I'll handle the report. Simpson checked his tablet. You're off external duties for the next week. Danielle will reassign you to internal maintenance. He turned to leave, then stopped. And Walker, let's keep the hallucination talk to a minimum. Don't need people getting spooked over nothing. The door slid shut behind him before I could respond. I stood there, half out of my exosuit, water pooling around my feet. Technicians moved around me, avoiding eye contact. The prep room felt different, tense. 2 senior operators who normally joked with me suddenly found their equipment fascinating. Even Naomi, who'd been on comms with me minutes ago, was nowhere to be seen. I finished stripping out of the exosuit, handing components to the waiting techs who began the standard post-dive maintenance. None of them asked what happened out there. Not one question about why I'd been out of contact or why the director himself had shown up to meet me. That wasn't normal. After a quick shower and change into my regular uniform, I headed to the maintenance bay instead of medical. I needed to find Donnie. If anyone would talk straight with me, it would be him. The maintenance bay sprawled across the lower level of Node 7, a cavernous space filled with spare parts, tools, and the massive exosuit storage racks. I found Donnie hunched over a dismantled thruster assembly, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. "Hey," I said, leaning against his workbench. He glanced up, then around the room before speaking. "Heard you had some trouble out there." "You could say that." I kept my voice casual. "Found something weird near the south quadrant. A fissure with what looked like structures." Donnie's hands went still. He put down his tools and wiped his fingers on a rag. "Let me guess. They told you it was a hallucination? Suit malfunction?" My pulse quickened. "Yeah. How'd you know?" He stood up and motioned me to follow him to the back of the bay, where the noise from the ventilation system would cover our conversation. "You're not the first," he said once we were alone. "Chen found something similar 3 months ago. Roberts before that. Both got the same speech from management. Where are they now?" "Transferred. Both of them, within a week of their incidents." Donnie picked up a random part and pretended to examine it. "Look, whatever you saw out there, the company doesn't want it known. Period. But what is it? Some kind of underwater installation?" He shrugged. "No idea. But I can tell you this. Every suit that comes back after one of these incidents gets completely wiped, and sometimes key components get replaced. Not repaired. Replaced." I processed this. "They're hiding evidence." "I didn't say that." Donnie's eyes darted toward the bay entrance. "Just saying it's odd. And if you're smart, you'll take whatever assignment they give you and forget what you saw. Otherwise, you might find yourself on the next transport topside with a reassignment notice. And trust me, the places they send people who ask questions, not the cushy deep-sea facilities." I nodded slowly, understanding the warning. "Thanks for the heads up. I didn't tell you anything." Donnie turned back to his work, conversation clearly over. I left the maintenance bay with more questions than answers. The hallways of Node 7 felt different now, less like a workplace and more like a maze of secrets. I needed facts, not rumors and warnings. The mapping room was usually empty during shift changes. I timed my arrival perfectly, slipping inside while the day crew had left and night shift hadn't arrived yet. The digital charts of our operational area glowed from the main console. I entered my credentials and pulled up the area where I'd encountered the fissure. According to my mental calculations, it was roughly 500 meters southwest of Node 7. But as the high-resolution seafloor map rendered on screen, there was nothing there. Just a smooth, featureless section of ocean floor. I zoomed in further, checking and rechecking the coordinates. Nothing. Not even a minor depression or geological feature. The area where I'd nearly been pulled into a massive underwater crack simply didn't exist on any official chart. I tried different mapping layers, geological surveys from before the facility was built, current topography, even the construction plans for Node 7 itself. All showed the same thing. A perfectly normal section of seabed where I knew for certain something very abnormal existed. "This is impossible," I muttered, checking the system's last update timestamp. It had been refreshed just 30 minutes ago, right after my return. Footsteps in the corridor had me quickly closing the files and logging out. I left through the secondary door just as 2 technicians entered, making my exit look routine. The next few hours I spent going through the motions of my new assignment, checking internal pressure seals and recalibrating monitoring equipment. Busy work, designed to keep me inside and occupied. I was inspecting junction panels in a rarely used corridor when I heard voices from around the corner. I recognized them immediately. Naomi and Christopher Schultz, the chief engineer. The containment protocols were designed for stable conditions, Christopher was saying, his voice tight with stress. We're well beyond that now. The directors won't approve emergency measures based on one incident, Naomi replied. I froze, pressing myself against the wall. They were just around the bend, out of sight. 1? This makes 4 in the last 6 months, Christopher shot back. The patterns are consistent. It's becoming active again. We don't know that for certain. The energy signatures are identical to the initial discovery. The periodic surges are getting stronger. What more proof do they need? There was a pause. Then Naomi's voice, lower now. The company knew the risks when they built here. They knew theoretical risks, Christopher said. Theories becoming reality, and we're not prepared. That tech today, Walker, he was less than 20 meters from the edge. If that current had been any stronger. I've submitted the readings from his suit before they purged them, Naomi cut in. It's in their hands now. I shifted my weight, and my boot squeaked against the floor. The conversation stopped instantly. I made a show of checking the panel in front of me as they came around the corner, pretending I'd just arrived. Walker, Naomi said, her expression quickly shifting to professional neutrality. I thought you were assigned to level 2 maintenance. Just finished there, I lied, working my way down the list. Christopher studied me with narrowed eyes. How long have you been here? Just got here, I said, tapping the panel. Number 12 on my checklist. Naomi glanced at Christopher, then back to me. I'll be reassigning your duties. Internal systems checks for the next week. Minimum. Nothing external. Right, I said. About what happened out there. Your medical evaluation shows elevated stress markers consistent with pressure-induced disorientation, she interrupted smoothly. Nothing to worry about. Common enough at these depths. So common that I'm grounded for a week. Christopher stepped forward. Standard protocol. We take safety seriously here. I noticed, I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Naomi's expression hardened slightly. Report to environmental control tomorrow at 0600. They need help with the filtration system calibration. They both walked away, their body language stiff. They knew I'd heard something, but not how much. I finished my shift and headed to the mess hall, my appetite gone but needing somewhere public to be. The usual dinner crowd filled the tables, conversations dropping slightly when I entered before resuming. News traveled fast down here. I grabbed a tray and sat alone, picking at food while thinking through what I'd learned. Something was happening outside, something the company had known about but perhaps underestimated, something worth hiding from their own employees. I spent 40 minutes in the mess hall, making my presence obvious. When I returned to my quarters, I knew immediately someone had been there. Nothing was obviously disturbed. They were too professional for that. But small things were off. My tablet was at a slightly different angle on the desk. The access panel to my personal storage locker showed fresh scratches around the keypad. I did a careful sweep, but found no obvious surveillance devices. Still, I kept my face neutral, as if I suspected nothing. Whatever they were looking for, they hadn't found it, because I didn't have it yet. The next morning, heading to my new assignment, Danielle Walker stepped into the corridor in front of me. She checked both directions before speaking. "Travis," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "stop asking questions. For your own good." "I haven't." "Yes, you have. With Donnie in the mapping room, listening to conversations that don't concern you." Her face was tight with worry. "They're watching you now." "Who's watching?" "Everyone." She moved closer. "Whatever you saw out there isn't worth your career. Or worse." "Or worse? What does that mean?" She didn't answer, just reached out as if straightening my uniform collar. Her hand brushed against my chest pocket, and I felt something small and solid slip inside. "Do your job. Keep your head down." She stepped back. "That's all the help I can give you." She walked away, leaving me standing alone in the corridor. I waited until I turned the corner before feeling what she'd passed me. A small data chip, no bigger than my thumbnail. I waited until I was alone in my quarters before taking out the small data chip. It sat in my palm, unremarkable in appearance. Standard OFC issue, the kind we used for daily operations reports. I turned it over, noticing no markings or labels. Whatever Danielle had slipped me, she didn't want it traced back to her. My tablet wouldn't read it directly. Company policy required all data transfers to go through the central system where they could be monitored. I needed to bypass that. Luckily, I kept an old, personal device tucked away in my footlocker, one I'd brought from home that wasn't connected to Node 7's network. The company technically prohibited personal electronics, but most of us brought something anyway. 3 kilometers underwater, you needed your own entertainment options. I pulled out the device, plugged in the chip, and waited. A password prompt appeared on screen. What would Danielle use? I tried her employee ID. Nothing. Her birth date. Nothing. Then I remembered. No relation between us despite our shared last name. On a hunch, I typed Walker and hit enter. The screen flashed, then populated with dozens of files. Jackpot, I whispered to myself. The first files were technical reports, energy readings taken around the Node 7 location dating back 18 months. That caught my attention immediately. Node 7 had only been operational for 8 months. I scrolled through more files, finding survey data, classified memos between executives, and security protocols for something called the Anomaly. A document titled Initial Discovery pulled my focus. I opened it, finding a report from the preliminary survey team that had mapped this section of the ocean floor. They'd detected unusual energy signatures emanating from what appeared to be a natural fissure, the same fissure I'd seen. The report was dated 14 months before construction on Node 7 began. I read through more files, my unease growing with each one. The mining operation, our supposed purpose here, was mentioned only in public-facing documents. Internal communications discussed containment, study parameters, and energy harvesting potential. One memo from the CEO to the board stated, "If early readings are accurate, what we've found could revolutionize energy production globally. Discretion is paramount until we understand what we're dealing with." The truth hit me like a physical blow. Node 7 wasn't a mining facility at all. It was built specifically to study whatever was in that fissure. I closed the files and removed the chip. Sleep wasn't coming tonight. I needed to find Danielle. The night shift was quieter, with minimal personnel maintaining essential systems. I checked the duty roster and found Danielle assigned to the Environmental Control Center. When I arrived, she was alone, monitoring atmospheric readouts. She didn't seem surprised to see me. "That was fast." "You knew I'd come," I said, keeping my voice low despite the empty room. "Did you review everything?"
"Enough to know we're not here to mine anything." I moved closer, speaking barely above a whisper. "The fissure, the energy readings, they found it first, then built Node 7 around it." Danielle checked the door before responding. "My brother was on the original survey team." "Your brother?" This was unexpected. "Mark Walker. He specialized in deep-sea geological formations." She tapped a few keys, bringing up system diagnostics, a cover in case anyone walked in. "He was excited about his assignment here, said it would change his career, then communication stopped." "What happened to him?"
"Officially, equipment failure during a dive." Her voice remained steady, but her fingers pressed harder against the keys. "No body recovered. Oceanic Futures paid out his life insurance, gave my parents a plaque honoring his service. You don't believe it? His last message to me mentioned unusual readings, something the company wasn't telling the survey team about. 3 weeks later, he was gone." She looked at me directly. "I requested a transfer here as soon as Node 7 opened. Took me 6 months to get approved. I processed this information. So you've been investigating all this time, gathering information, watching patterns." She minimized the diagnostic screen. "Come with me. There's something you need to see." We walked casually through the corridors, nodding at the few crew members we passed. Danielle led me to a small monitoring station connected to the sensor array, used primarily for collecting oceanic data. She sat at the terminal and entered a series of commands. I discovered a back door into the restricted sensor logs. They keep a separate system tracking the energy pulses from the fissure. The screen filled with a timeline of events, each marked with dates and energy readings. "These pulses have been occurring since initial discovery," she explained, scrolling through the data. "But look at the pattern." I studied the screen. The pulses were growing stronger and more frequent. The most recent one had occurred yesterday, exactly when I'd felt that strange current near the fissure. "That's when the conduit was damaged," I said. "The one I was repairing." "Yes. Each pulse affects our systems more than the last. The company knows it's dangerous, but they're more interested in the potential." "Potential for what?" "Energy. The readings suggest whatever's down there generates power unlike anything we've seen before." She pulled up a comparison chart. "That last pulse produced enough energy to power a small city for a day, and it lasted only 42 seconds. I whistled low. No wonder they're interested. Interested enough to risk lives. Her voice hardened. They knew the risks before they built here. The survey team reported instability. My brother warned them. We spent the next hour reviewing data, piecing together what the company knew and when they knew it. The picture that emerged wasn't flattering. Oceanic Futures had deliberately placed Node 7 near a potentially dangerous energy source, hiding the true purpose from most employees. "We should get back," Danielle finally said, closing the files and clearing the access logs. "Staying too long will raise questions." I nodded, but as we prepared to leave, another thought struck me. Wait, if the company is hiding all this, who tampered with my suit's recording data? Simpson himself? Not likely. He gives the orders, but someone else carries them out. She considered for a moment. There's a small security team with higher clearance. They report directly to corporate, not to Simpson. We parted ways at the junction to the residential section, agreeing to meet again tomorrow. I headed back to my quarters, mind racing with everything I'd learned. The next morning, I reported for my assigned internal maintenance duty. The work was mind-numbingly simple compared to external repairs, but it gave me time to think. Around midday, I spotted Donnie in the corridor outside the cafeteria. He turned and walked the other way when he saw me. I caught up to him near the equipment bay. "Donnie, hey, wait up." He stopped but didn't meet my eyes. "Got a lot to do, Travis." "What's going on? You've been avoiding me." "Just busy." He fiddled with his tablet. "Got 3 suits needing calibration before tomorrow's shifts." I studied him. His usual meticulous demeanor seemed frayed, with dark circles under his eyes and a slight tremor in his hands. "Come on, Donnie. We've worked together too long. Something's wrong." He glanced around, then jerked his head toward the equipment room door. Once inside, he closed it behind us. "I found something yesterday," he said, voice low. "After you turned in your suit." "What was it?" "Someone messed with your breathing apparatus." He pulled out a small component from his pocket. "This regulator valve was modified, set to gradually decrease oxygen flow over a 4-hour period." My stomach dropped. "That would have made you pass out. Maybe worse." He put the component back in his pocket. "Wouldn't have looked like sabotage either. Just equipment failure." "Like what supposedly happened to Danielle's brother," I murmured. "What?" "Nothing." I shook my head. "Any idea who did it?" "No. But they knew what they were doing." Donnie ran a hand through his hair. "I've replaced it already. Didn't file a report." "Why not?" "Because I checked the maintenance logs. Your suit was inspected right before your dive. Everything was certified perfect." His eyes finally met mine. "Whoever did this had access and authorization." "Thanks for telling me. I shouldn't have, but..." He paused. "You've always been straight with me. Just watch yourself, Travis. Something's not right here." I left Donnie to his work, my mind now juggling multiple disturbing realities. The mysterious energy source, the company's deception, and now a direct threat to my life. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of routine tasks and watchful glances over my shoulder. That night I lay in my bunk staring at the ceiling, too wired to sleep despite my physical exhaustion. I'd hidden Danielle's data chip inside my mattress seam, but the information it contained kept playing through my mind. Eventually, I drifted into an uneasy sleep. I jolted awake to blaring alarms and red emergency lights flashing in my quarters. The entire room shook, my lamp crashing to the floor. Another violent shudder ran through the facility, strong enough that I had to grab the bed frame to stay in place. The intercom crackled to life with Director Simpson's voice, strained but commanding. "All personnel to emergency stations immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, all personnel to emergency stations. Containment has been breached." I jumped out of bed, nearly losing my balance as another tremor rocked the entire facility. The emergency lights painted everything in a blood-red glow as I grabbed my uniform from the chair and yanked it on. No time for boots. I ran into the corridor in my socks. The hallway was chaos. People rushed in all directions, some still in sleepwear, others frantically pulling on gear. The overhead speakers crackled with static before Simpson's voice cut through again. "All section heads report status immediately. Engineering teams to backup systems. Security to containment zone. Another violent shake sent me stumbling against the wall. A water pipe overhead burst, spraying everyone beneath it. I pushed myself forward, heading toward the central hub where I might get answers. The tremors were getting worse, not better. "Travis!" someone shouted over the noise. I turned to see a maintenance worker, Miguel from night shift, pointing down the adjacent corridor. "Ellis is looking for you. Lab section." I nodded and changed direction. The lab section was 2 levels up. I took the emergency stairs since the elevators would be locked down during an alarm. The stairwell was packed with people heading to their emergency stations. I squeezed past them, taking the steps 2 at a time. When I reached the lab level, the corridor was eerily empty compared to the chaos below. The tremors continued, making the light fixtures swing overhead. I ran toward Naomi's research lab, nearly slipping on the smooth floor in my socks. I pushed open the lab door and found Naomi moving with frantic purpose. She was transferring files from the main system to portable drives while simultaneously gathering physical samples from the storage units and tossing them into an incinerator port. "Naomi, what's happening?" I asked, catching my breath. She barely glanced up. "Help me with these samples." She pointed to a refrigerated cabinet against the far wall. I moved to the cabinet and pulled it open. Inside were dozens of labeled containers with what looked like rock and sediment samples. "What am I looking for?" "The ones marked with red tabs. Put them in the incinerator. Now." I grabbed the first container with a red tab. "Why are we destroying evidence?" "Because some things shouldn't be studied," she said, typing commands into her terminal, "and definitely shouldn't fall into the wrong hands." I hesitated, holding a sample container. "Naomi, I need to know what's going on." Another violent tremor shook the lab. Equipment crashed to the floor. The lights flickered, went out, then came back dimmer than before. Emergency power. Naomi stopped what she was doing and looked at me directly for the first time. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with something I'd never seen in her before. Raw fear. "We found something, Travis. Something old. Something that wasn't made by us." "What do you mean, wasn't made by us?" "I mean, it wasn't human technology." She returned to her terminal, fingers flying over the keyboard. "The company discovered it 14 months ago. The energy signatures your suit picked up, that's just the surface of it." I placed the sample into the incinerator port and watched it drop into the flames below. The fissure I saw is just the access point. There's an entire network down there, buried under centuries of sediment. Technology we can't even begin to understand. She ejected a drive from her terminal and pocketed it. "The pulses you've been feeling? They're activation signals." "Activation signals for what?" "We don't know exactly, but whatever it is, it's responding now." The implications hit me like a physical blow. "You're saying we woke something up? Something alien?" Naomi grabbed my arm. "We didn't just wake it up, Travis. The company has been feeding it power. Node 7 was never about mining or research. It was built to study and interact with the technology." I remembered the data on Danielle's chip. "But why hide it? This could be the most important discovery in human history." "Because they don't understand it. And people fear what they don't understand." Naomi moved to another cabinet and began pulling out more samples. "Help me finish this. We need to get to the control center." I worked quickly, destroying the remaining samples while Naomi downloaded the last of her data. As we finished, the lab door burst open. A security officer I didn't recognize stepped in. "Dr. Ellis, Director Simpson is requesting all research leads in the control center immediately." Naomi nodded. "We're on our way." As the officer left, Naomi handed me one of the drives she'd filled. "Keep this safe. It's everything I know about what's down there." I slipped the drive into my pocket. "Why give this to me?" "Because I trust you, and because you've seen it firsthand." She gathered the remaining drives and we left the lab together. The corridors were even more chaotic now. Emergency teams rushed past us, carrying equipment and medical supplies. The facility continued to shake at random intervals, each tremor worse than the last. We took the main stairwell to the control center, fighting against the flow of people heading to evacuation points. When we arrived, the control center was a hive of activity. Every station was occupied, with technicians monitoring systems and calling out status updates. Director Simpson stood at the central command console, issuing orders. His usual composed demeanor was gone, replaced by barely controlled panic. Christopher Schultz was beside him, pointing at something on the main display. "Seal all exterior access points," Simpson ordered. "No one goes out, no one comes in." "Sir," one of the operators said, "we still have 3 teams outside doing repairs on the eastern section." I said, "Seal it. That's an order." I looked at the main screen. It showed a schematic of Node 7 with multiple warning indicators flashing red. "You can't just leave them out there," Danielle Walker said, stepping forward from her monitoring station. "They won't survive without access to the airlocks." Simpson turned to her. "If we don't seal the facility now, none of us will survive. Make the call." Danielle didn't move. "No." The room went quiet despite the alarms. Nobody challenged Simpson's authority like that. "What did you say?" Simpson's voice was deadly quiet. I said no. Danielle moved to her console and entered a command sequence. "I'm initiating emergency protocol 639. All personnel to be accounted for before facility lockdown." Simpson's face turned red. "Override that command." "Can't," Christopher said, checking his screen. "She's used her emergency authority codes. It would take 3 senior staff to counter it." Simpson looked ready to explode, but another violent tremor interrupted whatever he was about to say. This one lasted longer than the others, making the floor roll beneath our feet like we were on a ship in rough seas. "External camera feeds," I said, moving to an unoccupied monitoring station. "Let me see what's happening outside." Nobody stopped me as I brought up the exterior cameras. Most showed nothing but the usual dark ocean. But when I switched to the southern quadrant, where I'd seen the fissure, the image made my breath catch. The fissure had widened dramatically, and from within it poured a strange blue-green light that pulsed in a rhythm that seemed almost deliberate. As we watched, something began to rise from the crevice. Angular structures that looked like no building or machine I'd ever seen. They moved as they emerged, parts shifting and reconfiguring, as if the structures were assembling themselves. "What are we looking at?" I asked, no one in particular. "The beginning," Naomi said quietly beside me. Christopher rushed over to check the power systems. "We're losing the main grid. Something's draining it faster than we can generate." As if on cue, the lights flickered again and several monitors went dark before the emergency generators kicked in. The backup power brought systems back online, but I noticed something strange on the power distribution display. "The generators," I said, pointing at the screen. "Look at the energy flow." Christopher leaned in, his expression changing from confusion to shock. "That can't be right." But it was. The display clearly showed that instead of powering the facility's critical systems, the majority of the emergency power was being directed outward, toward the fissure. "It's not a mistake," Naomi said, her voice hollow. "It's by design." The truth hit me like a punch to the gut. Node 7 wasn't built to study that technology. "No," Naomi confirmed. It was built to power it. The control room fell silent as we all stared at the external feed. The structures continued to rise and reconfigure, growing larger and more complex with each passing second, feeding on our power. Whatever oceanic futures had awakened down there, it was fully awake now. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Node 7 wasn't studying the technology. It was feeding it. Around me, the control room staff froze at their stations, eyes locked on monitors displaying the growing structures. Simpson broke the silence first. "Ellis, I want those power relays redirected back to critical systems," he ordered, his voice tight. "Schultz, initiate containment protocol Alpha 6. Neither moved. The blue-green glow from the external feed cast eerie shadows across their faces. "That's an order," Simpson shouted, slamming his palm on the console. A violent tremor rocked the facility, stronger than before. Warning lights flashed across every display. The overhead lights dimmed, then surged back to life. "Level 3. Breach detected," announced the automated system. "Sections 12 through 17 compromised. Hull integrity failing." Danielle grabbed the facility-wide communication system. "All personnel evacuate to upper levels immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat. All personnel evacuate to upper levels. Section leaders account for your teams." Simpson lunged for the console, but Danielle blocked him with her body. "Director, we have over 200 people on this station. I'm implementing emergency evacuation protocols." "You don't have the authority," he started. "Actually, she does," I interrupted, pointing to the emergency protocols displayed on my screen. "Safety officer supersedes facility director during Category 1 emergencies. This qualifies." Another tremor hit, this one lasting longer. The floor vibrated beneath my feet as metal groaned around us. "Hull breach confirmed in Section 15, the automated voice announced. "Flooding in progress." "That's the lower residential quarters," Danielle said, her face paling. "There are off-duty personnel down there." I turned to her. "I'll help coordinate the evacuation. You maintain control here." She nodded sharply. "Take emergency team 2. They're assembling at Junction B." I ran from the control room, the corridor outside chaotic with personnel rushing to emergency stations. The overhead speakers continued broadcasting Danielle's evacuation orders as I pushed against the flow of traffic toward Junction B. I found a group of 6 crew members in emergency response gear waiting for instructions. "Walker," the team leader acknowledged. "We're headed to Section 15. Reports of 20+ personnel trapped by flooding." We moved quickly, descending through the emergency stairwell. 2 levels down, we encountered our first obstacle, a sealed bulkhead with water seeping through the seams. "Section 16 is completely flooded," the team leader said, checking his tablet. "We need to reroute through Maintenance Shaft C." We backtracked and crawled through a narrow service tunnel, emerging one section over from our target. The corridor ahead was ankle-deep in seawater, emergency lights reflecting off its surface. "Get those people to upper-level assembly points," I ordered as we helped a group of soaking wet crew members climbing up from a partially flooded stairwell. "Follow the emergency route markers." For the next 20 minutes, we worked systematically through the lower sections, clearing rooms and directing personnel upward. The water level rose steadily. By the time we reached the last section, it was waist-deep and rising fast. "Final sweep complete," the team leader reported after checking the last cabin. "Section is clear." I tapped my comm. "Danielle, lower sections are cleared. What's the status on the rest of the facility?" "Upper level secure, but we're losing structural integrity throughout the southern quadrant," she replied, her voice crackling with static. "Get your team back to Assembly Point 3. As we made our way back up, I noticed a flashing light from inside a maintenance room. unusual during an evacuation when most systems would be powered down. The door was slightly ajar. I signaled for the team to continue while I checked it out. Inside, hunched over a communications terminal, sat Donnie. He hadn't noticed me. His back was to the door as he spoke in hushed tones. Proceeding exactly as predicted, he was saying. The gateway formation is accelerating. Power consumption has tripled in the last hour. I stepped inside, letting the door close behind me. Who are you talking to, Donnie? He spun around, eyes wide with shock. The screen behind him showed a split video feed. 3 figures in corporate boardroom attire on one side, technical readouts on the other. Travis, he stammered, quickly hitting a key that blanked the screen. I was just reporting to executives while we're in the middle of an evacuation. I moved closer, noticing the communications setup wasn't standard issue. On a channel that's not on any official frequency list? His expression shifted from surprise to resignation. You don't understand what's happening here. Then explain it to me. I leaned against the door, blocking his exit. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been lying to all of us. Donnie sighed, running a hand through his hair. The company discovered the technology 3 years ago, not 14 months. What you saw in the fissure, that's just the tip. There's an entire network down there, buried under centuries of sediment. And Node 7? Built specifically as an activation site. He turned back to the terminal, typing commands that brought up schematics of the facility. See these power conduits? They were never meant to mine energy. They were designed to channel it directly to the structures. The diagram showed power flowing from Node 7's core directly into the ocean floor. No wonder the repairs never seemed to last. The system was being pushed far beyond normal operational parameters. You sabotaged my suit, I said, the pieces falling into place. You were the one who purged the recording data. Donnie didn't deny it. I had orders. We couldn't risk exposure before activation was complete. Complete? People are dying, Donnie. The facility is breaking apart. Sacrifices for progress. He gestured to the screen, which now showed the external feed. The structures had formed a massive circular pattern, pulsing with energy. Do you realize what this is? It's the greatest discovery in human history. A technology that generates unlimited clean energy. It will transform humanity's future. I stared at the screen, watching as new segments emerged from the seabed, connecting to the growing formation. What is it building? A gateway, Donnie said, his voice filled with awe. A portal. The company's been studying fragments of this technology for years, but this is the first fully functional system we've found. A gateway to where? Before he could answer, the facility shook violently. Warning alarms blared as the lights flickered. Hull breach in Section 10, announced the automated system. Emergency bulkheads engaged. I grabbed Donnie by the collar. We need to get to the evacuation point. Now. We ran through corridors that were increasingly tilted as the facility's structural integrity failed. When we reached Assembly Point 3, Danielle was directing personnel into evacuation pods. 2 more pods ready, she called out when she saw us. Where's your emergency team? Already loaded, I confirmed, pushing Donnie toward one of the pods. What's Simpson doing? Her face hardened. Trying to override the evacuation sequence. He's locked himself in auxiliary control. Another tremor hit, stronger than before. Metal screeched as the facility shifted. He's going to get everyone killed, I said. Not if we stop him. Danielle pulled me aside while the evacuation continued. I've got people on the remaining pods, but Simpson has executive override codes. He could lock down the whole system. We left the assembly point, racing toward auxiliary control. The route took us past the main laboratory section, where we found Naomi surrounded by equipment and displays. "Ellis," I called out. "You need to evacuate." She barely looked up. "Almost got it. The energy signature, it's not random. There's a pattern." I moved to her side, seeing complex waveforms displayed across her screen. "What are you saying?" "It's creating a connection point," she explained, fingers flying across the keyboard. "The structures aren't just drawing power, they're channeling it, focusing it to establish a link between locations." "Between what locations?" Danielle asked. Naomi shook her head. "I don't know yet. The mathematics suggest vast distances. Possibly. The power cut out completely for several seconds before emergency systems engaged. When the displays reactivated, they showed Simpson in auxiliary control, manually overriding safety protocols. "All personnel return to stations," his voice came over the comm system. "Evacuation terminated by executive order." Danielle grabbed her security tablet. "He's locking down the remaining pods." We ran the rest of the way to auxiliary control, finding the door sealed. Danielle accessed the security panel beside it. "I can bypass his lockout," she said, connecting her tablet to the system. "But it'll take time." "Time we don't have," I replied, eyeing the structural integrity warnings flashing on nearby monitors. While Danielle worked on the door, I accessed a maintenance panel, rerouting emergency power away from auxiliary control. The lights inside Simpson's room dimmed on the security feed. "What are you doing?" he demanded over the comm. "Stopping you from killing everyone left on this station," I replied. "The project is over, Director." "You don't understand." Simpson's voice was desperate now. "Corporate gave explicit orders. The activation must continue regardless of casualties. The technology is too valuable." "Got it," Danielle announced as the door slid open. Inside, Simpson lunged for the console, but I tackled him before he could reach it. We struggled briefly before Danielle disabled his access with her security override. "All evacuation pods unlocked," she confirmed, tapping commands into the system. "Remaining personnel are loading now." Simpson slumped in defeat. "You're making a terrible mistake. This discovery will change everything." "Maybe so," I said, pulling him to his feet. "But not at the cost of everyone here." We secured Simpson and returned to the main evacuation point, where the final pods were preparing for launch. Naomi met us there, clutching a portable drive. "I've got the data," she said breathlessly. "The energy signatures, the structural patterns, everything we know about the technology." As the last personnel boarded the evacuation pods, I felt it again, that vibration from earlier, but magnified tenfold. The entire facility groaned under immense pressure. Metal twisted, and bulkheads strained against forces they were never designed to withstand. "Final evacuation sequence initiated," announced the automated system. "Remaining personnel board immediately." I moved to a viewport, drawn by a strange illumination from outside. The blue-green glow had intensified, casting eerie light through the murky water. What I saw made my blood run cold. Dozens of massive shapes moved in the darkness around Node 7, drawn to the pulsing energy of the portal. They were unlike anything I'd seen before. Angular, impossible geometries that seemed to bend the light around them. Some were as large as the facility itself, others smaller, but moving with disturbing precision toward the energy source. "Travis, we need to go," Danielle called from the final pod's entrance. I couldn't look away from the viewport. The shapes were converging on the portal, which had grown into a swirling vortex of energy directly above the fissure. Whatever oceanic futures had awakened, we weren't the only ones who had noticed. I tore my gaze from the viewport and turned to Danielle, who was gripping the doorframe of the evacuation pod, knuckles white. "Everyone's waiting. We need to go," she repeated, her voice steadier than her hands. The facility shuddered around us, metal groaning under stress I couldn't fully comprehend. Those shapes in the water, angular, impossible, moving with purpose, had changed everything I understood about our mission here. I took one last glance at the swirling vortex of energy above the fissure before jogging toward Danielle. "Upper Bay," I said. "That's where most of the crew should be gathering?" She nodded as we moved through the corridor. "Emergency protocol routes everyone there during full evacuations." Simpson was trying to override it, but we stopped him. The overhead lights flickered, then stabilized on emergency power. An automated voice announced structural integrity failures in sections 12 through 18. The floor beneath us vibrated continuously now, no longer in waves, but a constant, unsettling tremor. "I need to coordinate the remaining evacuations," I said. "How many people are we still accounting for?" Danielle pulled up a tablet showing the facility schematic. Red dots indicated personnel locations throughout the structure. About 35 still making their way up from lower levels. Engineering teams are trying to maintain power to the emergency systems. We rounded a corner and nearly collided with a group of lab techs carrying equipment cases. I recognized them from the research division. "Leave the non-essential gear," I ordered. "Take only what you can carry without slowing down. Upper Bay now." They hesitated and one woman clutched her case tighter. "This contains irreplaceable samples." "Nothing's irreplaceable compared to your life," I cut in. "Upper Bay, move." Danielle and I continued forward as the techs reluctantly abandoned some of their cases. The corridor ahead was partially blocked by fallen ceiling panels. We climbed over them, the metal edges digging into my palms. The facility's internal communication system crackled to life. "All remaining personnel proceed to upper evacuation bay immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." "That's Christopher," Danielle said. "At least he made it to the command center." We passed a section where water sprayed from a cracked wall seam, the pressure creating a fine mist that dampened our clothes as we hurried through. My mind kept returning to those shapes outside, geometric but somehow organic, converging on the energy source with deliberate movement. When we reached the central junction that connected to the upper levels, we found a bottleneck of personnel trying to access the main stairwell. Panic was spreading as people pushed forward. "Everyone stay calm," I shouted above the noise. "We have time if we move in order. Security team, organize groups of 6 to ascend." 2 security officers nodded and began directing people into smaller groups. The evacuation proceeded more smoothly, though the continuous tremors made people glance nervously at the ceiling. Danielle's tablet beeped with an alert. "Travis, Simpson's accessed the pod bay systems from auxiliary control. He's trying to lock down the evacuation pods." "What? Why would he?" I stopped mid-sentence. "Where's auxiliary control?" "Level 2, Section 4, near the executive quarters." "I'll handle Simpson. You keep coordinating the evacuation." I turned to go, but Danielle grabbed my arm. "Not alone. He's desperate now. Take Morgan with you." She gestured to a security officer who stood nearby. I nodded, and Morgan fell in step beside me as we pushed against the flow of evacuating personnel. We took a maintenance shaft to bypass the crowded stairwell, climbing up narrow metal rungs to level 2. The executive section was eerily quiet compared to the chaos below. Most leadership had already evacuated or joined the coordination efforts. The door to auxiliary control was locked, but Morgan overrode it with her security clearance. Inside, Simpson hunched over a console, fingers flying across the control panel. The facility status screens showed the evacuation pod bay, with 4 of the 6 pods highlighted in red with lockdown initiated, flashing beside them. "Simpson!" I shouted. He spun around, eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. "Walker, this doesn't concern you." Morgan drew her sidearm. "Step away from the console, Director." Simpson laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the small room. "You don't understand what's happening. None of you do." I stepped forward, keeping my voice level. "Then explain it. While you unlock those pods." Another violent tremor shook the room. A ceiling panel crashed down between us, sending Simpson stumbling backward against the console. "Those pods stay locked until the company recovery team arrives," Simpson said, steadying himself. "They need to secure what we found." "People will die," I said. Simpson's face hardened. "Acceptable losses compared to what we've discovered." I lunged forward, grabbing his collar and pushing him against the wall. "Nothing is worth sacrificing the crew." 20 years, Simpson shouted, his composure cracking. "The company found this technology 20 years ago at another site, but couldn't activate it. Too deep, too much pressure. Node 7 was built specifically for this, to harness enough energy to wake it up." I loosened my grip slightly. "The mining operation was never real." "Of course not." Simpson straightened his jacket. "We needed a cover story. Even most of the board doesn't know. Just a few executives who understood the potential." The facility rocked again. Warning lights flashed across the auxiliary control screens. Multiple hull breaches on lower levels. "Morgan, unlock those pods," I ordered. She holstered her weapon and moved to the console while I kept Simpson against the wall. "You're making a mistake," Simpson said. "Whatever's coming through that portal will change everything. Human technology will advance centuries overnight." "You don't know what's coming through," I countered. Simpson's eyes gleamed with something between fear and reverence. "No, that's the point." My communicator buzzed. Christopher Schultz's voice came through tight with urgency. "Travis, we've got a situation at the pod bay. Need you here now." "On my way," I replied, then turned to Morgan. "Pods unlocked?" She nodded. "Override complete. All evacuation pods accessible." "Bring him," I said, nodding toward Simpson. "Don't let him near any controls." We left auxiliary control and made our way toward the evacuation bay. The tremors had worsened, making it difficult to walk without bracing against walls. Twice we had to detour around collapsed sections of corridor. When we reached the evacuation bay, Christopher was directing crew members into organized groups. 4 cylindrical evacuation pods stood ready, their hatches open and interior lights glowing. "What's the situation?" I asked Christopher. He pulled me aside, lowering his voice. "Something's attaching to the outer hull. Multiple contacts, moving across the facility's exterior." He brought up external camera feeds on a nearby monitor. Dark shapes clung to the facility's outer shell, angular, segmented forms that seemed to shift between solid and fluid states. As I watched, one extended what looked like an appendage that glowed blue at its tip. The metal hull beneath it began to melt away. "They're cutting through," I said, feeling my throat tighten. Christopher nodded grimly. "Multiple points of breach expected within 20 minutes. Maybe less." "Where's Naomi?" I asked, scanning the crowded evacuation bay. "Research level. Said she needed critical data before evacuation." I swore under my breath. "I'll get her. Start loading people into the pods." Christopher grabbed my arm. "Those things are already inside the lower levels. Be careful." I took a different route to the research level, using maintenance shafts to avoid the main corridors where structural integrity was failing. The research level was eerily quiet when I arrived. Most personnel had already evacuated. I found Naomi in the main lab, frantically downloading data to a portable drive. Multiple screens displayed complex patterns that reminded me of what I'd seen rising from the fissure. "Naomi, we need to go. Now." She didn't look up. "Almost done. This data is critical. It proves the technology was designed as a gateway." I moved beside her, glancing at the screens. A gateway to what? Between worlds. She disconnected the drive and tucked it into her pocket. The energy signatures, the structural patterns. It's all intentional. This wasn't some random discovery. It was placed here. A crash echoed from somewhere down the corridor, followed by a strange scraping sound. "They're inside," Naomi whispered. We moved to the lab door, peering out cautiously. At the far end of the corridor, something moved, a shape that seemed to flow rather than walk. Its edges hard and geometric, but its movement fluid. It approached a storage room, extended a limb, and melted through the door. "It's not attacking," I realized aloud. "It's extracting." We watched as the entity emerged from the room carrying what looked like a server bank, cradling it within its form. It moved past another lab where 2 researchers were hiding under a desk, but didn't acknowledge them. "They're after technology, not us," Naomi whispered. We backed away slowly, then turned and ran toward the emergency stairwell. 2 more entities passed us in intersecting corridors, each carrying equipment from the research level. They showed no interest in us, focused entirely on their collection. When we reached the evacuation bay, Danielle was directing the final groups into the pods. Her face showed relief when she saw us. "Last group," she said. "Pods 1 and 4 are loaded and ready for launch." I did a quick count. "What about pods 2 and 3? Christopher approached, his expression grim. "Sabotaged. Control systems fried." "Who would—" I started, then spotted Donnie Howell standing near the remaining pods, watching us with an unsettling calm. "You," I said, moving toward him. "You did this." Donnie didn't deny it. "We can't leave. Not now. Not when we're so close." "Close to what? Death?" I gestured around at the failing facility. "To advancement." Donnie's eyes were fever bright. "Whatever comes through that gateway will elevate humanity to unprecedented technological achievement. The company understands this." "The company isn't here," I countered. "We are, and those things are cutting through the hull to take our technology, not share theirs." Donnie shook his head. "They're cataloging, learning. It's first contact, don't you see? They need to understand us before they can help us." A violent tremor shook the bay, stronger than any before. Warning lights flashed as the automated system announced, "Critical structural failure imminent. All personnel evacuate immediately." "We don't have time for this," Danielle said. "Pods 1 and 4 can hold everyone if we squeeze." I turned back to Donnie. "Last chance. Come with us." He stood his ground. "I'm staying." Before I could argue further, a terrible sound came from above, metal tearing, followed by the hiss of pressurized systems failing. The ceiling bulged inward as something massive pressed against it. "They're here," Naomi whispered. "Everyone in the pods. Now!" I shouted. The remaining crew scrambled into the functioning pods. I helped an injured engineer through the hatch of Pod 4, then looked back for Donnie. He stood watching the ceiling, a look of anticipation on his face. The metal gave way with a screech, and something flowed into the room, larger than the entities we'd seen before, its surface shifting with geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Donnie, please," I called out one last time. He didn't turn, transfixed by the entity descending from the ceiling. I had no choice. I pulled myself into Pod 4 and sealed the hatch. Danielle activated the launch sequence from the internal controls. The pod vibrated as clamps released and emergency thrusters engaged. Through the viewport, I saw the facility walls buckling inward, collapsing under pressure from all sides. Our pod shot upward through the launch tube, the acceleration pushing me back against the seat. The last thing I saw before we cleared the facility was the evacuation bay imploding, metal and glass crushed by forces I couldn't comprehend as Node 7 collapsed in on itself. The pod rocketed upward, rattling violently as we accelerated through the launch tube. My back pressed hard against the seat while my hands gripped the manual control handles on both sides of the navigation console. The narrow viewport showed nothing but darkness and swirling water, illuminated briefly by the pod's external lights. "Systems check," I said, forcing myself to focus on procedure rather than the image of Node 7 imploding behind us. Danielle moved to the co-pilot seat beside me, her fingers working quickly across the secondary control panel. Oxygen at 96%, hull integrity holding, thrusters at maximum output. The other passengers, Naomi Ellis and 3 technicians whose names I couldn't remember, sat strapped into the bench seats behind us. One of them, a young man with a bloody gash across his forehead, groaned as the pod lurched upward. "How's Jackson?" I asked, not taking my eyes off the controls. "Conscious, but disoriented," Naomi answered. "Possible concussion from falling debris. I've applied pressure to stop the bleeding." The pod's internal lights flickered as we continued our ascent. The depth gauge on the console showed we had risen almost 500 meters from the ocean floor, but still had over 2,000 to go before reaching the surface. "Travis," Danielle said, her voice dropping. "Look." I glanced at the rear camera feed displayed on the small monitor to her right. The seafloor below us was transformed, no longer the flat, sediment-covered expanse I'd worked above for years. Where Node 7 had stood, a massive depression had formed, with twisted metal debris scattered across the seabed. But what caught my attention was the swirling vortex of energy hovering above the site of the facility. "It's fully formed," Naomi whispered from behind us. She had unbuckled to check on the injured tech, but now stood frozen, staring at the monitor. The portal, there was no other word for it, pulsed with blue-green light, creating currents that twisted the water around it. As I watched, pieces of the collapsed facility were drawn toward it, disappearing into its center. I turned back to the navigation controls. "Increasing thrust. We need to put more distance between us and that thing." The pod's engines whined in protest as I pushed them beyond their recommended output. We continued to rise, but something felt wrong. The depth gauge wasn't advancing as quickly as it should. "We're slowing down," Danielle said, confirming my suspicion. "Ascent rate dropping." I checked the thrust levels. "Engines are at maximum. Something's pulling us back." A chill ran through me as I realized what was happening. The portal was generating enough force to affect our trajectory, creating a current that worked against our engines. I adjusted our heading, trying to angle us away from the direct pull. "It's not working," I muttered. "We're still being drawn toward it." One of the techs behind us, a woman with short gray hair whose name tag read Chen, pointed at another monitor. "External camera 3 shows something on the hull." I switched the main screen to camera 3's feed and felt my stomach tighten. Dark, elongated shapes were attaching themselves to our outer hull, organisms unlike anything I'd seen in my years of deep-sea work. They had multiple limbs that ended in what looked like suction pads or hooks, allowing them to cling to the smooth metal surface of our pod. "What are those things?" the third technician asked, his voice cracking. "I don't know," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but they're adding drag and weighing us down. Naomi moved closer to the screen. They came through the portal. They must be attracted to the pod's energy signature. I ran through our options. Standard protocol for biological contamination was to surface and wait for a decontamination team, but we were barely making progress upward as it was. If more of those things attached to us, we might not make it to the surface at all. Danielle, I need to perform an emergency thruster purge, I said. It'll clear the hull, but use up a significant portion of our fuel reserves. She nodded grimly. Do it. We won't make it to the surface with those things dragging us down. I flipped open the protective cover on the emergency purge controls. Everyone, brace yourselves. This will be rough. I counted down from 3 and hit the button. The pod shuddered violently as superheated exhaust blasted from ports all over the hull. The rear camera showed the organisms detaching, their limbs flailing as they were blown away by the force of the purge. The sudden loss of drag sent us shooting upward with renewed speed, throwing everyone against their restraints. The injured tech, Jackson, cried out in pain. It worked, Danielle said, checking the readings. They're off, but our fuel reserves are down to 62%. I grimaced. That's going to limit our range once we reach the surface. I adjusted our course again, maintaining our ascent vector. At least we're moving away from the portal now. As the adrenaline of the moment faded, I became aware of a steady beeping sound coming from beneath the control panel. I frowned, looking for the source. Anyone hear that? I asked. Danielle tilted her head, listening. Sounds like a transmission signal. I reached under the panel and felt around until my fingers touched something that shouldn't have been there. A small device attached to the underside with magnetic clips. I carefully removed it and held it up. It's a tracking beacon, I said, examining the small black box with the OFC logo stamped on its side. Someone put a tracker in our pod. The atmosphere in the small cabin instantly tensed. Everyone looked at each other with suspicion. Who would... Danielle began, but stopped when Naomi stood up. I did, Naomi said quietly. Under company orders. All evacuation pods were equipped with them 6 months ago during routine maintenance. I stared at her, feeling betrayed. Why? Naomi looked down. In case of unauthorized use or containment breach. The company wanted to ensure they could locate and retrieve any personnel who might have been exposed to the technology. Exposed? Chen asked sharply. You mean contaminated? They're treating us like lab specimens. Naomi didn't deny it. I didn't know the full extent of what we were dealing with. None of us did. Just that the company considered it valuable enough to take extreme measures. I turned the tracker over in my hand. It was still actively transmitting our location and trajectory. So Oceanic Futures knows exactly where we are right now, I said. Naomi nodded. And they'll have response teams already mobilized. To rescue us? The third technician asked hopefully. Danielle shook her head. To contain us. We've seen too much. I thought about Simpson's willingness to sacrifice personnel, about the sabotaged pods, about the company's lies regarding Node 7's true purpose. My decision wasn't difficult. I'm disabling this, I said, prying open the tracker's casing with a tool from the emergency kit. Inside was a simple circuit board with a battery pack. I disconnected the power source, and the beeping stopped. There. Now we need to figure out our next move. The pod's communication system crackled to life with a burst of static. Anyone receiving? This is Schultz in Pod 2. Repeat, this is Christopher Schultz. Can anyone hear me? I grabbed the comm handset. Christopher, this is Travis in Pod 4. We read you. Thank God, Christopher's voice came through, sounding relieved but tense. "Listen carefully. We've just surfaced, and there are Oceanic Futures vessels already on site. They're not here for rescue." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Their communications are unencrypted. I heard their orders clearly. They're instructed to retrieve all evacuation pods and secure all personnel. Anyone who resists is to be considered compromised and dealt with accordingly." A heavy silence fell over our pod. The injured tech, Jackson, spoke up for the first time since the launch. "Dealt with?" he asked weakly. "What does that mean?" No one answered. We didn't need to. "What's your position, Christopher?" I asked. "We're about 5 kilometers northeast of the designated extraction point, currently maintaining distance from company vessels. Our pod took damage during launch. We're taking on water slowly, but should stay afloat for a few hours. What about you?" I checked our navigation system. "Still submerged, but we'll surface in approximately 12 minutes at current ascent rate. We disabled the tracking beacon in our pod." "Smart move," Christopher replied. "They're using the beacons to locate the pods. I disabled ours too, but not before they got a fix on our position." I pulled up the digital chart on the navigation console, scanning for options. "There's a decommissioned research platform about 80 kilometers east of our position," I said. "Platform 17B. It was used for climate research before the funding was cut. Should be abandoned now." Danielle leaned over to look at the chart. "That's outside our standard operational area. The company might not think to look there immediately." I did some quick calculations. With our remaining fuel and oxygen levels, we can make it there with about 19 hours of breathable air to spare. "That's cutting it close," Naomi said. "Better than the alternative," I replied. I turned back to the comm. "Christopher, did you copy that? Platform 17B, 80 kilometers east." "Copy that," he confirmed. "We'll try to make it there if we can keep this pod floating. Be careful on surfacing. They're using drones for aerial surveillance." "Understood. We'll maintain radio silence after surfacing unless emergency. Good luck." "You too. Schultz out." The comm went silent. I adjusted our heading, programming the new coordinates into the navigation system. The pod responded sluggishly, its engines straining after the emergency purge had depleted so much of our fuel. As we continued our ascent, I checked the rear camera one last time. The portal was still visible in the distance, its swirling energy now stabilized into a more defined shape. As I watched, something began to emerge from its center, a dark mass that gradually took form. "What is that?" Danielle whispered, looking over my shoulder at the monitor. We all stared as the shape continued to materialize. Massive, with strange geometries that seemed to shift and change as it moved. It wasn't a vehicle or a machine, at least not like anything built by human hands. It moved with purpose, propelling itself through the water toward the ruins of Node 7. "That doesn't belong in our world," Naomi said softly. I couldn't argue with her assessment. Whatever had just come through that portal, it was clear we had only seen the beginning of whatever oceanic futures had awakened on the ocean floor. The dark mass that emerged from the portal grew larger in our rear camera feed until it filled the entire screen. None of us spoke as we watched it take shape. Something not built by human hands moving with deliberate purpose toward what remained of Node 7. I forced myself to look away and focus on our immediate survival. "Approaching surface in 30 seconds, I announced, gripping the manual controls tighter as our pod rocked from side to side. The ascent had been rough, with failing stabilizers and compromised hull integrity from our emergency purge. The depth gauge counted down the final meters until we broke through. Sunlight flooded the viewport as we breached the surface, bobbing violently in the open ocean. I activated the emergency flotation system, and the pod steadied somewhat as external airbags deployed. Navigation showing platform 17B about 12 kilometers east, Danielle said, checking the console. Pod's thrusters are at 41% capacity. Should be enough, I said, though I wasn't entirely convinced. The warning lights flashing across my control panel told a different story. Everyone stay secured. This ride's going to get bumpy. I engaged the surface thrusters, and the pod lurched forward, skimming across the water. The damaged stabilizers made it pitch and yaw unpredictably. Jackson groaned from the bench seat behind us as we bounced over a wave. "How's he doing?" I asked, not taking my eyes off the controls. "Still conscious," Naomi answered. "But we need to get him proper medical attention soon." The journey to platform 17B took nearly 40 minutes. Each minute stretched longer than the last, as warning indicators continued to multiply across my console. When the decommissioned research platform finally appeared on the horizon, I nearly sagged with relief. "There it is," I said, pointing through the viewport at the rusted structure rising from the ocean. "Looks abandoned, just like the database said." As we drew closer, I spotted another pod already docked at the platform's lower access port. "Looks like Christopher made it." I maneuvered our damaged pod alongside the platform's landing dock, wincing at the screech of metal as we bumped against it. The docking clamps engaged with a shuddering clank that reverberated through the pod's hull. "Everyone okay?" I asked, powering down the engines. Nods and murmured affirmatives came from the others as they unbuckled their harnesses. I helped Danielle unseal the hatch, and salt air rushed in, a welcome change from the pod's increasingly stale atmosphere. Christopher Schultz was waiting for us on the dock with two of his engineers. His face was grim, but he managed a nod of acknowledgement as we climbed out. "Glad you made it," he said. "We've been here about 20 minutes. Place is deserted, just as expected." "How many got out with you?" I asked, helping Jackson through the hatch. The technician's face was pale, and he leaned heavily on my shoulder. "7 of us total," Christopher answered. 3 more pods launched, but we lost contact during ascent. "Simpson?" Danielle asked. Christopher shook his head. "No sign of him. Last I saw, he was still in auxiliary control." We made our way up a series of metal staircases to the platform's main level. The structure had clearly been abandoned for years. Rust coated most surfaces, and salt residue crusted the windows. But the basic infrastructure remained intact. "We need to establish a temporary base," I said, surveying the main operations room. "Check what systems are still operational, see if we can get communications working." "Already on it," Christopher replied. "Power systems are offline, but the emergency generators still have fuel. Ramirez and Chen are working on getting them running." For the next hour, we worked to make the platform habitable. I helped Christopher's team restore power to the main sections, while Naomi tended to Jackson's injuries, using a first aid kit we'd found in a storage locker. Danielle took charge of communications, trying to establish contact with the mainland. I was checking the water purification system when Danielle called me over to the communication station. "Something's wrong," she said, adjusting dials on the outdated equipment. "I can't get through on any frequency." I looked over her shoulder at the equipment. "Could be damage to the antenna." "No," she said, shaking her head. "I'm getting signals, just not connecting to any channels. It's like..." She paused, recalibrating the receiver. "It's like we're being jammed." "Jammed?" I frowned. "By who?" "Who do you think?" She met my eyes. "Oceanic Futures wouldn't want anyone talking about what happened down there." The implications sank in. We weren't just stranded. We were being deliberately isolated. "Let me see what I can do," I said, examining the old communications array. This equipment is outdated, but that might work to our advantage. Modern jamming systems might not be calibrated for older tech. Naomi joined us, having stabilized Jackson as best she could. If we boost the signal strength, we might be able to punch through the interference. We spent the next few hours working on the communication system, connecting parts from our pod's transmitter to the platform's older equipment. It was makeshift and unstable, but it might work. "Try it now," I told Danielle after connecting the final cable. She activated the system, and the monitor flickered to life, showing a scrambled but partially readable radar display. "I'm getting something," she said, adjusting the controls. "Not clear enough for voice communication, but I can see vessels, multiple vessels, converging on our position." I leaned in closer, watching the blips on the screen. "How far out?" "Based on this reading, maybe 2 hours away, coming from the northwest." "Company vessels," I said, the realization settling in my gut like a stone. "They're coming for us." Naomi bit her lip. "We need to see what's happening at Node 7, if that portal is still active." "The observation deck," Christopher said from the doorway. He'd been listening silently. "This platform was used for deep-sea research. There should be equipment we can use." We followed him up another flight of stairs to a domed room at the top of the platform. Banks of monitoring equipment lined the walls, most of it covered in dust. "This hasn't been used in years," Christopher said, brushing off a control panel. "But the basics should still work if we have power." I helped him connect the power cables while Danielle and Naomi cleared dust from the screens. After several failed attempts, the main observation system hummed to life. "It works," Christopher said, unable to hide his surprise. "These old systems were built to last." "Can you aim it toward Node 7's coordinates?" I asked. He nodded, inputting the coordinates we all knew by heart. The main screen showed static at first, then gradually resolved into a grainy but visible image of the ocean surface nearly 80 kilometers away. What I saw made my blood run cold. The surface of the ocean was wrong. Where Node 7 had stood on the ocean floor, the water now swirled in an unnatural pattern, creating a massive whirlpool several kilometers across. But it wasn't just the water that was disturbing. Rising from the center of the whirlpool were structures. Massive technological structures that defied human architecture, with angles and surfaces that seemed to shift as we watched. "My God," Naomi whispered beside me. "It's expanded." The structures rose hundreds of meters above the water's surface, glistening with an oily sheen that caught the sunlight in ways that hurt to look at. Around these towers, smaller objects moved with purpose. Entities that weren't ships or submarines or any human craft I'd ever seen. "Zoom in on the western edge," Danielle said suddenly, pointing at something on the screen. Christopher adjusted the controls, and the image shifted, revealing several oceanic futures vessels at the perimeter of the phenomenon. As we watched, one of the ships was dragged toward the center of the whirlpool, its hull tipping up as it was pulled beneath the waves. "They're trying to contain it," Christopher said, "and failing." A sudden bang from below startled all of us, metal clanging against metal, followed by voices. "Someone's docked," Danielle said, her hand moving to the sidearm she'd taken from security. We hurried back down to the main level, weapons ready. The platform's main door was open, and standing in the entrance, leaning heavily against the frame, was Director Curtis Simpson. Blood soaked his right side, and his face was ashen. But in his hand was a company-issue handgun, pointed unsteadily in our direction. "No one move," he gasped, stepping forward and wincing with the effort. Behind him, I could see a small corporate shuttle docked at the platform's auxiliary port. "How did you survive?" I asked, keeping my voice level, despite the shock of seeing him. "Escape pod," he said. "Manual launch tube in my office. Perks of being director." His laugh turned into a cough that spattered blood on his chin. "Where is it? The research data?" Naomi stepped forward slightly. "Curtis, you need medical attention." "The data first," he insisted, waving the gun for emphasis. "All of it. The company needs to know what we're dealing with." "What you're dealing with?" I couldn't keep the anger from my voice. "You knew what was down there. You built Node 7 to activate it." Simpson's eyes narrowed. "We didn't know what would happen. Not exactly. But you knew enough," I pressed. "You knew it wasn't just energy signatures. You knew you were activating something ancient. A gateway system," he admitted, slumping against the wall but keeping his gun trained on us. "The most advanced technology ever discovered. Clean energy beyond anything we could imagine." "And you lost control of it," I said. Simpson's face twisted in what might have been a smile. "We never had control. That was the mistake. We thought we were harnessing it, but we were just waking it up." He looked at Naomi. "The data. Now." Before Naomi could respond, the entire platform shuddered violently. Equipment crashed to the floor and the lights flickered. It felt different from the tremors at Node 7, more like something had struck the platform itself. "What was that?" Christopher asked, grabbing a console to steady himself. Another shudder ran through the platform, stronger than the first. I ran to the nearest window, looking out at the ocean around us. Nothing visible from this angle. "The observation deck," I said, already moving toward the stairs. "We need to see what's happening." I took the stairs 2 at a time, the others following close behind. Even Simpson followed, dragging himself up with one hand on the railing, his gun now tucked into his waistband. Back at the observation equipment, I quickly adjusted the view to show the waters surrounding our platform. At first, I saw nothing unusual. Then a dark shape appeared at the edge of the screen, moving toward us from the direction of Node 7. I zoomed out, and my breath caught in my throat. Rising from the water less than a kilometer away was a vessel, if you could call it that. It was massive, easily the size of an aircraft carrier, but with a design that defied human engineering. Its hull was black and seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The shape was vaguely reminiscent of a manta ray, but with protrusions and appendages that served unknown purposes. As it breached the surface, water cascaded from its hull in sheets. The platform shuddered again as the displacement waves hit our structure. "That's not one of ours," Simpson whispered, all pretense of authority gone from his voice. As we watched, sections of the vessel's hull slid open and smaller craft emerged, each about the size of a helicopter, but with no visible rotors or propulsion systems. They moved through the air in a way that seemed to defy physics, changing direction instantly without any apparent momentum. "They're heading this way," Danielle said, her voice steady despite the situation. I turned to look at Simpson, who had gone even paler. "You opened a door," I said, "and now we're caught between your company and whatever just came through it." Simpson had no response. None of us did. We stood in silence, watching the approaching craft, knowing we were witnessing the beginning of something beyond our understanding. I stared at the approaching craft on the observation deck screen. It moved in ways no human vessel could, cutting through the water at impossible angles, defying any physics I understood. "We need to get somewhere more secure," I said, tearing my eyes from the screen. "Now." Everyone stood frozen for a second, then jumped into action. Danielle grabbed a radio from the desk, while Christopher helped the injured Jackson to his feet. Simpson still had his gun, but it hung limply at his side as he stared at the screen, his face pale and drawn. Where? Naomi asked, already gathering the data drives. I thought fast. The platform was decades old, built when companies worried about industrial espionage and sabotage. Central operations, core of the platform. These old research stations were built with security in mind. We moved quickly down the metal stairs, the platform groaning around us. Simpson stumbled behind, keeping distance between himself and the rest of us. Smart move on his part. Nobody felt particularly protective of the man who'd left people to die. There. Christopher pointed to a reinforced door marked Central Operations, Authorized Personnel Only, at the end of a narrow corridor. The door was heavy steel, with an electronic lock that had long since died. Christopher and I put our shoulders against it and pushed. It gave way with a screech of rusted metal, opening into a circular room filled with outdated equipment and dust-covered consoles. "Help me," I called to the others as we started pushing filing cabinets and heavy metal desks against the door. We worked fast, piling anything we could find to create a barrier. "What about the other access points?" Danielle asked, already checking the room's perimeter. "There." Naomi pointed to a maintenance hatch in the floor and another in the ceiling. We secured those too, using chains and locks we found in storage lockers. With our makeshift fortress secured, I took stock of our situation. 13 of us had made it to the platform. Me, Danielle, Christopher, Naomi, Simpson, Jackson with his head injury, and 7 other crew members from Node 7. Everyone looked exhausted and scared. "We've bought some time," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "But we need a way off this platform." "The pods are damaged," Christopher said. "Mine barely made it here." "What about the platform itself?" I asked. "These old stations always had emergency protocols." Christopher nodded. "I'll check the schematics." He moved to a dusty terminal and started wiping screens clean. While he worked, I heard the first sounds of company boats docking. Metal clanged against metal, and voices carried through the platform's skeleton. "They're here," Danielle said, her voice low. A distant boom shook the platform. Not the company, something else. The alien craft must have reached us too. We were caught in the middle of whatever was happening. Christopher called me over. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a schematic on the screen. Platform 17B was an executive research station. They built in an escape system. I leaned closer. "A submarine?" "Small emergency vessel, docked underneath the platform. Access point is..." He traced a line on the diagram. 2 levels down, through the maintenance shaft. Hope flickered. A way out. I turned to the others. "We've found our exit strategy." A loud bang against our barricaded door made everyone jump. Metal scraped against metal as something tried to force its way in. "Company or visitors?" one of the techs asked. "Does it matter?" I replied. "Neither one's friendly." "We need to hold them off while we get that sub ready," Danielle said, already moving to reinforce our barrier. I nodded. "Christopher, you and Danielle coordinate defense. Keep them out as long as possible." I turned to Naomi. "You and I need to finish what we started with those signals." "What are you talking about?" Simpson demanded, finding his voice again. "The alien technology responds to specific signals," I explained. "At Node 7, the company was sending activation pulses, but there might be other commands we can send." "Like what?" Simpson asked. "Like go away," I said. "Or better yet, shut down." Naomi and I set up at a workstation in the corner, connecting equipment salvaged from our pod to the platform's old systems. The platform shook again, more violently this time. Dust rained from the ceiling. They're trying to cut through the outer hull, Christopher reported from another monitor. Which they? Someone asked. Both, he replied grimly. I focused on our work. Naomi had downloaded data about the energy signatures from Node 7, and we were trying to make sense of the patterns. The banging at our door grew more insistent. Someone or something really wanted in. Look at this, Naomi said after 20 minutes of work. She pointed to a repeating sequence in the data. The energy pulses from the fissure followed this pattern before the portal fully opened. I studied it. What if we reverse it? Send the pattern backward? A shutdown command, she whispered, eyes widening. It's worth trying. We worked faster, rigging the platform's old communications array to broadcast the reverse signal. We had to boost its power, so we connected it to power cells from our pod. How do we aim it? I asked. The coordinates of Node 7, Naomi said. That's where the portal is centered. A crash from the door made us all turn. Metal bent inward as something powerful struck it. Our barricade wouldn't last much longer. Almost there, I told the others, fingers flying over the keyboard. Just need to calibrate the signal strength. Another crash. The door buckled further, and I saw a mechanical tool, some kind of pneumatic battering ram, push through the gap. Company forces. Get ready to move to the submarine, I told Christopher. Make sure Jackson can travel. The signal was almost configured when Simpson lunged toward our workstation. Stop, he shouted, reaching for the equipment. You don't understand what's at stake. I blocked him, pushing him back. People are dead because of whatever your company woke up down there. We have investors waiting for this technology, Simpson said, his voice rising with desperation. Do you know what this is worth? Unlimited energy, interstellar travel capabilities. We're talking about changing humanity's future. You don't control it, I said. You never did. He raised his gun, pointing it at the equipment. I can't let you shut it down. Everything happened fast then. Danielle tackled him from the side and they crashed into a console. The gun went off, the bullet hitting a ceiling panel. They struggled, and Simpson's head hit the edge of a metal desk with a sickening thud. He went limp, unconscious. Signal ready, Naomi called. I ran back to the console and hit the transmission key. The old equipment hummed as it sent our shutdown sequence toward the coordinates of Node 7. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the platform stopped shaking. Look, Christopher said, pointing to a monitor showing the exterior. The alien craft had stopped their assault. They were turning, moving away from the platform, heading back toward where Node 7 had been. It's working, Naomi said. On another screen, we could see the portal in the distance. It was changing, the swirling energy becoming unstable, contracting and expanding erratically. The portal's collapsing, I said. We need to move, now. Christopher and Danielle cleared a path to the maintenance shaft while I helped Naomi gather our equipment and data. 2 crew members dragged the unconscious Simpson. Should we just leave him? Someone asked. We're not like him, I replied. We descended through the maintenance shaft to the level where the emergency submarine was docked. The small vessel was old but looked operational, designed to carry about 20 people. As we reached it, the platform gave an ominous groan. Metal twisted somewhere above us, and the whole structure listed to one side. The platform's breaking apart, Christopher said. The battle between those things and the company vessels must have damaged the support struts. I opened the submarine's hatch and started helping people inside. Everyone in, now. Water began spraying through seams in the walls. The platform wasn't going to last much longer. Through a porthole, I could see alien craft and company vessels still engaged in combat around us, though many of the alien ships were retreating toward the collapsing portal. Our signal had worked, but the damage was done. "That's everyone," Danielle said as the last crew member climbed aboard. I took one final look at the flooding compartment before jumping into the submarine and sealing the hatch behind me. The submarine rocked as I scrambled to the control console. Salt water dripped from my clothes onto the old metal floor. Everyone found seats or handholds wherever they could in the cramped space. Simpson lay unconscious in the corner, his wrists bound with cable ties that Christopher had found in a storage compartment. "Does anyone know how to operate this thing?" I asked, scanning the outdated controls. Christopher stepped forward. "Basic submarine operations were part of our emergency training. Not this model specifically, but the principles should be similar." Together we examined the instrument panel. The submarine was at least 20 years old, but the gauges still worked, and the emergency power had kicked in automatically when we opened the hatch. Christopher pointed to a series of switches along the left side of the panel. "Main power, ballast control, propulsion," he said, flipping them in sequence. The lights brightened and a low hum filled the cabin as the engines came to life. "We need to get away from the platform," I said. "It's going to collapse completely any minute." I took the main controls while Christopher managed the ballast tanks. The submarine lurched forward, breaking free from the docking clamps with a metallic groan. I guided us away from the underside of the platform, maneuvering through a maze of support struts and debris that had fallen from above. The periscope was old but functional. I raised it and rotated the viewing angle, catching glimpses of the chaos around us. The platform's lower sections were already flooding, metal twisting under pressure. Further out, I could see dark shapes moving through the water, the alien vessels retreating toward the portal. Company boats circled above, their hulls visible from beneath the surface. "How's our hull integrity?" I asked. Danielle had found the system's monitoring station, holding at 87%. We took some damage breaking away from the dock. A sharp crack sounded above us, and everyone looked up. Through the periscope, I watched as one of the platform's main support legs gave way, sending a massive section of the structure plunging into the water. "Brace yourselves!" I shouted, gripping the controls tightly. The shockwave hit us seconds later, knocking several people off their feet. I fought to maintain our course as debris rained down around us, clanging against our hull. One of the techs helped Jackson back into his seat, while Naomi checked his bandages. "We need more depth," Christopher said, looking at the sonar display that showed more of the platform breaking apart. "Those pieces could crush us." I nodded and pushed the dive controls forward, sending us deeper. The submarine responded sluggishly, its old systems protesting the sudden commands. We descended to about 50 meters, finding clearer water beneath the immediate danger zone. "Where are we heading?" Danielle asked, moving to stand beside me at the controls. "Away from the portal," I replied, turning the submarine east. "As far and as fast as this old tub can take us." Through the periscope, I could still see the swirling energy of the portal. It was changing, becoming unstable, the blue-green light pulsing erratically. Our signal had worked. The alien vessels were retreating into it, their sleek forms slipping back through the dimensional gateway. Then it happened. The portal collapsed in on itself with a blinding flash that even the water couldn't fully dampen. I pulled away from the periscope, spots dancing in my vision. A second later, an underwater shockwave more powerful than anything I'd felt before slammed into us. The submarine rolled violently, throwing everyone against walls and equipment. Warning lights flashed across the control panel. A pipe burst near the rear of the cabin, spraying cold seawater inside. Two of the techs rushed to seal it while Christopher fought to stabilize our ballast. "Hull integrity down to 63%, Danielle called out, clinging to her station. "We've lost power to the starboard thrusters." "Can we surface?" I asked Christopher, who was frantically working the ballast controls. "Maybe, but we need to get farther away first. That shockwave will have secondary effects, currents, debris clouds. If we surface too close, we could get pulled back in." I nodded and pushed the remaining functional thrusters to their limits. The submarine vibrated around us, straining against the turbulent water. Through the periscope, I could see the water was filled with swirling silt and debris, reducing visibility to almost nothing. I had to navigate by instruments alone. For 20 tense minutes, we continued moving away from the implosion site. The submarine's damaged systems protested the whole way, with new warning lights joining the already crowded display. Water continued to seep in from small breaches, and 2 of our crew worked constantly to pump it out and patch the leaks. "I think we're clear of the worst currents," Christopher said, studying the sonar. "We should attempt to surface while we still have power." I agreed, and began the surfacing procedure. The submarine angled upward, rising slowly through the water column. The depth gauge counted down. 40 meters, 30 meters, 20 meters. "Brace for surface breach," I announced as we approached the final meters. The submarine broke through with a jarring impact, rocking wildly in the open ocean swells. Daylight streamed through the periscope, and I adjusted it to get a full view of our surroundings. The sea behind us was a maelstrom, churning violently where Node 7 and Platform 17B had once stood. A massive whirlpool had formed, dragging down floating debris from the platform. The Oceanic Futures vessels had pulled back to a safe distance, their lights visible on the horizon. But they weren't alone anymore. "We've got company," I said, continuing to scan the perimeter. "Military vessels. Looks like Navy and Coast Guard, and some unmarked ships that are probably government agencies." Naomi stood up, steadying herself against the rocking motion. "They'll be looking for survivors and evidence." That reminded me of our precious cargo. I moved to where Naomi had stashed her data drives and Danielle's evidence against Oceanic Futures. The waterproof cases had protected them through our escape. "We need to secure these," I said, checking that all the drives were intact. "If the company gets hold of them first, everything gets buried." Danielle joined me, her face grim. "We should make copies. Distribute them among everyone here." I nodded. "Good idea. Anyone who has a personal device, bring it over." While several crew members dug out phones and tablets from pockets and waterproof pouches, a groan from the corner signaled that Simpson was regaining consciousness. He blinked slowly, looking around the submarine with confusion before his eyes focused and hardened. "You've destroyed everything," he said, his voice raspy. "Years of research, potential worth trillions." "You nearly got us all killed," I replied, not looking up from the data transfer I was setting up. Simpson laughed bitterly. "You think this is over? Oceanic Futures isn't the only company that found these sites. There are others around the world, different companies, different governments. Some have been active for years." I paused, looking at him. "What do you mean, active?" "The technology responds to power. Feed it enough and the portals stabilize. Some have already begun extracting materials, maybe even knowledge." Christopher, who had been monitoring our systems, turned sharply. "You're saying there are more portals like this?" Simpson didn't answer, but his smile told us everything. "We need to get this information out," Danielle said urgently. "Not just about Oceanic Futures, but everything we know about the portals and the technology." I returned to copying the data, transferring portions to every device we had available. Each person would carry a piece of the puzzle, enough that if any of us made it to the public, the truth would come out. The submarine rocked suddenly as a large wave hit us. Through the periscope, I could see a Coast Guard vessel approaching our position, having spotted our emergency beacon. "They're coming for us," I announced. "Everyone remember, we stick to the facts. What we saw, what we experienced. The company will try to discredit us. Maybe worse." "What about Simpson?" one of the techs asked. "He comes with us," I said firmly. "He's got questions to answer." As the Coast Guard vessel drew closer, we prepared to abandon the submarine. It was taking on water faster now, the damaged hull giving way in multiple places. We gathered what few belongings we had and stood ready by the hatch. "They'll separate us for debriefing," Danielle warned quietly. "Standard protocol for incidents like this." "Then we meet afterward," I replied. "Once the immediate questioning is done, we need to coordinate our next steps." She nodded. "I'll find a way to contact you when things settle down." The Coast Guard vessel was alongside us now, crew members throwing down lines and preparing a rescue basket. I helped Jackson into the first lift, watching as he was carefully raised to the deck above. One by one, our group followed, with Simpson, still bound, going up under the watchful eyes of two of our techs. I waited until last, securing the data drives in my pocket. As I prepared to leave, I noticed something strange on my left arm. Just below my wrist were several geometric markings, perfect angles and lines forming a pattern I didn't recognize. I tried to wipe them away, thinking it might be some residue, but they remained. Then I remembered. During our escape from Node 7, one of the entities had brushed against my arm as I sealed a door. It had felt cold, almost electric. As I stared at the markings, thinking about what might still be out there beneath the waves, they seemed to shimmer slightly, taking on a faint bluish glow that matched the energy of the portal. I quickly pulled my sleeve down to cover them as a Coast Guard officer called down for me to hurry. I climbed into the rescue basket and was lifted onto the deck of the Coast Guard vessel. Government agents in plain clothes were already separating our group, leading them to different parts of the ship. Simpson was being handcuffed and escorted away under heavy guard. "Travis Walker?" A woman in a dark suit approached me. "I need you to come with me for medical examination and debriefing." I nodded and followed her, glancing back one last time at the churning sea. Danielle caught my eye from across the deck and gave me a small nod before being led away. I turned and walked toward wherever they were taking me, feeling the strange markings on my arm pulse with warmth against my skin.